All right. Well, I think let's get going. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining. I'm actually delighted to say we've got almost 100% attendee rate from members, which is a huge testament to our highly esteemed guests that we have with us today. I'd like to extend, firstly, a couple of very special welcomes to new members. We have a couple of faces amongst us and first-timers. Nikki from Fendi, David from David Collins, Caroline from Victoria Beckham, James from Abercrombie and Fitch, Katerina from Tod's, and Oliver from Burberry. Welcome to you. This will sort of give you a bit of a taster of the sort of conversations we have at LCC. Obviously, the format is very different. No coffee and pastries today, but we will survive. A very big thank you, firstly, to our LCC partners for supporting us. We wouldn't be here without you, so thank you. That's Charlotte from Cision, Yvonne from Spot on Minds, the luxury recruitment service, Loic from ePressPack. I don't know if you guys have seen how relevant that online newsroom format is these days, so do have a look if you're not familiar. And if anyone would like an intro to any of our partners after this, please pop me a note in the chat box or email and I can set it up. And now, turning to our very special guest, Jo Ellison, editor of How to Spend It. As you all know, Jo has been responsible for breathing new life into the title since she joined 6 months ago, bringing new voices, an updated definition of luxury, and most of all, this very much prevailing sense of cool to the title. Prior to this, Jo was the FT's fashion editor for 5 years, joining from British Vogue, where she was features director for 7 years. Now, I received a huge amount of questions, most of which I've been able to weave into already a very long list from me, but we'll chat for about 30 to 40 minutes, after which there's an opportunity to put a couple more questions forward if we haven't covered these. So do pop these in the Q&A box as we chat, as you think of them throughout, and I will double back to them afterwards. Today I'll be covering how to spend its response to the crisis, looking at some projections for the luxury consumer and spend, some other trends that have popped up during the crisis, and explore some of the immediate and future plans for how to spend it. For the sake of ease and clarity, I'll be addressing Corona, the pandemic, the lockdown, the whole shebang as the crisis. So without further ado, hi Jo, how are you?
Hi.
And where are you?
I'm in North London, and yes, I'm in my living room. Hi.
Okay, perfect. Have you been a lover or hater of lockdown? How's it been going?
It's been fine, actually. I think I'm very lucky. I'm very comfortable. I've got space to work. I've got the worst Wi-Fi in the world, which is somehow rather irritating. Should spend on something a bit faster, and we've continued to produce the magazine at the same production rate as ever, so we've stuck to the schedule. Nothing's changed. Obviously there's been a bit of a drop in advertising, but actually our editorial content has pretty much stayed the same. So we've all been working our little asses off, which has been a bit of a blessing. I've been really grateful because it's kept my head busy, and it's mean that I keep thinking about what's going on. So it's been challenging and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The just on the Wi-Fi note, you mentioned dropout Wi-Fi. If we do have any dropouts during this webinar, everybody just sit tight. We will come back. We'll sort it out. So yeah, obviously you have been working really hard, and it's very much obvious in what you've been putting out. And it was amazing to see how quickly How to Spend It responded to the crisis. I mean, it seemed seamless, to be honest. But what was going on behind the scenes? How easy was it to change the editorial schedule and the way you've been working?
Well, I think we kind of really realized that we were kind of heading into quite an extraordinary situation just before the menswear issue came out, which is at the beginning of March. And we were scheduled for a couple of other themed issues after that, including an interiors and a travel issue. And so we did a lot of soul searching as to whether or not we should, what was appropriate, whether it was sort of was it the right thing to sort of be doing features about incredibly expensive interiors and sort of candlesticks and vases at a time when we expected there to be thousands of deaths. I mean, it was what is this? Should we be running against this news agenda? Is it authentic? Is it legitimate? Is it appropriate? There was quite a lot of soul searching. And obviously there were various issues. The interiors issue, the design issue, was very much tied to an advertising schedule, and that was still, you know, the advertisers were still pretty confident with the issue that was going ahead. So we stuck with that, and then we'd spent a lot of time rankling with the travel issue and whether or not we would do that. And actually we ended up going to press with it on the date than it was expected. But yeah, we have a 2-week gap between when we go to press and when we come out. And so the Thursday before we go to press, I have a bit of a heart attack thinking about all the millions of things that might happen in the meantime. But I have to say that as lockdown's gone on and things have become a little bit clearer, or like you can at least see possibly where you're going to be in 3 weeks time. It was more like whilst the world was shutting down that it was really, you know, it was suddenly were running features about Milan in the middle of like lockdown, and it just seemed totally inappropriate. But yeah, I mean, tonally, I think you have to be incredibly careful. It's a tightrope we walk. But I think my big takeaway after sort of 3 months now is that our readers have very, very much been looking for escapism, not in a kind of like silly, decadent or hedonistic when all this is over, but I think they have wanted something that's just been able to take them out of their living rooms or out of the spaces that they're in. And they've wanted to be distracted by beauty and by the sight of beautiful locations and beautiful things. So I've tried to make it as accessible as possible, whilst recognizing that we might not be able to actually access it literally for a little while. So yeah, it's kind of trying to moderate between the two things.
Exactly. And then I'm sure sort of you felt the role of the title probably changed during that time. If you're sort of providing this sort of escapism but equally addressing the crisis, it must have been a very difficult balance to strike.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we met in November, I said I was very keen that we look at how to spend it as a branding tool, and to really think about the way that we looked at the spend. And obviously it's something that we're still thinking about and trying to negotiate as we go forward. I mean, you know, it's a difficult title at a time of like a massive recession, unlike any that we've seen in history. But I do really maintain that the spend should be about how we spend our lives. It's about our time. It's about the way we do things. It's also about how we spend money for philanthropic causes, how we spend our time to do better in the world. So I'm hoping that we've kind of what was already a shift in our focus going into the redesign, which happened in February, has now been kind of rapidly accelerated through the COVID crisis. But it's still very much, you know, are we spending it wisely? Are we spending our lives in a way that we can be proud of? I mean, those are things that I think that will continue to be massive themes through the year. So I think how to spend it, to my mind, is something that I'd still like to pursue. But let's revisit it in December and we'll decide whether the title's still working.
Exactly. Well, I also, I mean, you obviously made it highly relevant as well to what people were doing in their everyday lives. I mean, I loved that you covered baking equipment. That was great. Did you end up covering some topics that you just never thought you would?
I think it was definitely, I mean, I think what it is what's good about a title like How to Spend It is that it's quite broad. So you can kind of shift your focus according to whatever you feel is the flavour of the day. So obviously, as travel sort of ceased to be a possibility for so many people, we shifted our focus to interiors. So it became very domestic. We've done a lot more features about like embroidery and craft and painting and sculpture and things that you can do with your hands yourself. And actually those things have really resonated with readers. And it was something that I wanted to bring into the issue right from the get-go. It's just sort of, I feel like now I've actually had a better canvas on which to sort of really test case things that perhaps would have been seen as a bit more unusual in the past. But at the same time, I didn't want to just sort of take us into, I didn't want it to be granola and Herscher. I didn't want it to be about suffering. I wanted it to be about the pleasures of life. So, you know, also we might run a piece about swimming pools because everyone loves a swimming pool. It doesn't mean you have to buy a swimming pool or you have to have a swimming pool, but sometimes we just like to look at amazing photos of swimming pools.
Exactly. And earlier this month, I guess, just going back to the way you're working, when we saw photographers providing portraits of their lives, so a very different style of content as well as working with contributors. Were there other methods like this that you experimented with?
We're still, we were fortunate enough in that we'd banked quite a lot of stuff that we've been able to roll out over the last 3 months, but I'm not going to pretend that the cupboard isn't getting a little bit bare. And doing a shoot during this crisis has been, like, I think for all luxury titles and magazines and publishing and for brands, has been like the biggest obstacle. Not so much the photography itself, because I think with social distancing you can be creative, but very much it's been a problem with getting a product on the page. So if you've got to dress a model in an outfit by a brand, that it's so many sort of it's so many issues to getting to that image. So of course, you know, every photographer who lives with a model has become, you know, our most popular friend. They probably have never worked so hard. Any photographer who's got a studio, who can do still lives, anyone who can pretty much just run with it and do it themselves. It's got very guerrilla style, and that definitely is a change. And it's definitely something I'm sure that the whole industry is feeling, is that to a certain extent you sort of have to provide people with the tools and say, look, go and do what you can and we'll see how it goes. Whilst also working on incredibly limited budgets, because I don't think it's any, you know, I don't think anyone's going to pretend that, you know, we haven't had our budgets looked at quite seriously. So yeah, it's a bit more experimental, and I have resisted doing a shoot through Zoom because I've seen so many of them already, and it's hard to be original when there's only 3 methods to being able to do something. But it's yeah, it's a creative challenge, but it's also quite an exciting one.
Yeah, I'm sure we do love a challenge. Do you think this could be a step change in the way the creative process works long term? So
yeah, I think, you know, I think there's been, I'm used to being on shoots in the past, or in fact I was preparing a shoot just before lockdown in which I think there were like 24 people involved to shoot a man and a celebrity, and I think those days will probably those days are limited, because you just won't be able to have that many people on a set. There'll be much more kind of there'll be much more rigor over the way in which things are put together. People will think about who needs to be there. I think various people who are like managers and middlemen aren't actually necessary to the equation. I'm really hoping, I mean, if I was being mega optimistic, I'm really hoping that it will bring the creative into a place where they have a bit more autonomy and can actually just crack on with it and do what they want. And we'll have to have a lot more trust. So we'll have to just say, look, here you go, you do it. I trust you to provide something that I can run. So it's a nice opportunity to kind of open a dialogue and sort of take away some of this kind of micromanagement that I think has happened a lot in the creative process in previous years.
Well, we shall see. I look forward to hearing an update from you on that in a couple of months. So let's turn to think about the luxury consumer. We've mentioned about sort of obviously how to spend its role in talking about, you know, the material luxuries, but then actually the much wider intrinsics, and of course those have never been more important than now. So whether it's sleep or family time, or actually freedom, of course, has taken on more importance than ever. Do you think people will be more considered in their choices, or do you think we'll bounce straight back into our materialistic habits?
I think it depends on the demographic. I think it depends on the employment, sort of what we're looking at in terms of employment in the next 6 months. I think at a point in time when millions of people are being made unemployed, there will be definitely a more careful consideration of how much you're prepared to share your wealth. I think that sort of acquisitive nature, possibly that sort of social media thing where you post pictures of, you know, your latest acquisitions. I think people will become a bit more mindful about sharing that information with people. I think you've seen already a big backlash in America where, or in the rest of the world, where influencers in big houses have been like posting their kind of lockdown images, and there is a, you know, there's a real issue going on about inequality. And of course we're seeing what's happening in America at the moment, and a lot of that is born out of just, you know, general wealth inequity. So I think I would be disappointed if we just leapt back into our old ways. But at the same time, yes, I am a consumer magazine. So I think the luxuries that perhaps we were looking at in a year ago, where there was a lot of conversation about experiential luxury. There was an awful lot of focus, obviously, on travel, food. I think maybe it will become, we'll focus a bit more on shared experiences. So it will be about the mealtime. It will be about seeing friends. It will be about interiors and design and what we do with our houses, how we welcome people into our homes, what we want, what we do with the space that's a bit closer to us. I also think there'll probably be a huge boom in second home properties and people moving to the country. So gardening will probably become like a massive deal, probably. Like what to do with your land will be quite interesting, I think, moving forward.
Oh, lovely. So features on fountains and landscape architecture.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I think cultivating your space, isn't it? The Voltaire sort of cultivate your garden. I think there's a lot of that going on now. I think people are, they've had to internalize, they've had to like look far closer to home and see, look at their lives, over weeks and weeks and weeks, see what they like, what they don't like. And that might be as simple as like, I don't like the color of that wall, but it also might be, I don't like living where I live and I don't like working the way I've been working. Why don't I just move to the country and set up my office from my back garden? So I think there's opportunities now for real changes in sort of social habit that have been so ingrained and so long term that we've all assumed that that's the way it is. And I think this crisis, if anything, has shown a lot of people there are many other ways to do things.
It's interesting what we've seen happen in Asia there was sort of so much speculation about this revenge spending concept. You've been hearing about that, presumably. There's been some indications immediately that would have been the case. Have you heard any more about sort of how that's evolved as a concept over the last few months?
I heard anecdotally, I think like everybody, that there are still kind of huge transactions being made. There's sort of various stories about like very high-end brands experiencing kind of massive days of revenue. I mean, I'm wondering whether similar things would happen on like Bond Street next week or when the shops finally reopen. I think people have been spending money. I think there is a sort of sense of like, I deserve this. I've spent the last sort of 2 months kind of in jail, and this is my get out of jail treat to self. I think especially, I look at my daughter and her peer group, and I think young people or like people who are under 30 have a totally different attitude to lockdown and what they've experienced than perhaps someone who's like in their 40s or over. And I think they will be much more social, and they will want to kind of, they will want to spend. And also we're going to see this kind of tremendous, we've got all this surplus stock and we're going to see like huge sales coming up. So will that encourage more spending, or will people be saving? I think if you're selling things very cheap in like an extended glorious summer sale that goes on forever and ever, people will be tempted to buy. So I have so many kind of conflicted thoughts about it, but certainly, anecdotally in the art market, there have been some incredible sales. Anecdotally in the fine jewellery market, there's been some of the biggest sales that they've made in recent history. Things are happening, but they're definitely happening much more quietly than they might have been.
No, I've been hearing exactly the same as well, and certainly some of the jewellery boutiques in across Asia, but of course Hong Kong have had record sales of all time, sort of on day one of their opening, which is highly encouraging, but equally potentially problematic as well for the long term.
And it's also where you look about long-term investment, isn't it? I think everyone always talks about the flight to quality. So I think that you will see the high-end brands who have got a reputation that they've done damage limitation throughout this crisis by kind of showing goodwill or like investing lots of money into PPE or whatever it is that they've done. I think you will see some sort of like consumer traction with those brands because they feel as though they've kind of been with them, alongside them. There's been a lot of like interesting messaging going on. And I think that will be, I think moving forward, that will be really interesting. And also, of course, beauty. I think beauty's got like opportunities that very few other luxury businesses have. And I think they've continued to see kind of quite strong sales through the crisis. So that's another area that I think we'll see a large focus on moving forward.
Interesting you mentioned sort of these big brands. I mean, there has been a lot of speculation that it will be these who, really win out in the end, whether they've done this philanthropic work or not. So it might be, that because they're trusted, because they're familiar, they feel comfy, they sort of feel reassuring to people, people will gravitate towards those. And equally in hospitality, what's super important about those sort of trusted standards is the sanitation standards.
Yeah.
People will be gravitating towards people who have got those sort of rigorous global standardization that that people feel comfortable with. Are you hearing sort of similar things about that industry?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it. I mean, I think, you look at the beauty industry, I think this is like, it's had that some of those kind of old grand dam brands of the previous decades have really suffered in recent years because of the millennial brands coming through. And whilst I think the millennial brands that have been agile and be able to work through this crisis because they've been online, there's definitely a kind of sense that, a trusted brand who are making product with chemicals that I'm going to put on my face, those kind of things. I think people will I think there'll be a kind of flight to quality and also to tradition. I think my feeling is very much what you're saying, and likewise with the bigger brands in terms of like fashion and apparel and accessories. I think there will be a sense that if I'm going to buy one thing, like we did a big trench coat feature, for example, last week in the paper, and it was this kind of thing: if you're going to buy a trench coat, which one you're going to buy? And like there were 3 brands basically people will automatically go to. So I think people will see a bounce in that sense. It does mean that it will probably go back, it might unravel some of messaging where they've tried to have a sort of broader spread of things. But I think you're absolutely right.
Well, time will tell. Also, I suppose in terms of on the retail experience, social distancing will change that experience entirely. Do you think maybe this is the moment when the luxury industry finally is able to get past that sort of maximum 20% online digital spend, or is it that the sort of intrinsic in-store experience is actually so crucial for those luxury transactions?
I mean, I can't imagine that people would want to shop in that kind of environment as a preference to shopping at home at the moment. But then I'm quite an old person and I don't have the same relationship maybe with like bricks and mortar and the opportunity to go to a store. But I mean, most people who probably didn't use online shopping in the same way pre this crisis have started buying such kind of like basic daily like household needs. They've had so many things delivered. I think everyone's become a lot more comfortable with it, and I think the spend will be exponential in across kind of all methods. And I'm sure that apparel sales online will go up. I just can't see how going to a shop and going to a changing room, trying on something, and then having to have that sort of like shelved for 3 days before it's kind of reappropriated to put back on the shop floor. I don't see how that could be preferable to most consumers, but I'm not all consumers, so I can't say for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, lots of our members have been talking about they're doing, I guess, opening the store just for 1 customer, 2 customers of that. So that sort of level of personalization is going through the roof as they start about opening, and invitations to their super spenders, which we'll see how that develops as well, and whether people will take them up on these invitations, we'll see.
I think actually that's quite interesting. Like I remember talking to several brands before in that VIP experience where you invite 6 friends or a group of people that's quite small anyway, and then they have like exclusive shopping days just for them, and those have always been kind of incredibly profitable and incredibly successful. So actually I suspect you're right, you'll see a great deal more of those like in-store experiences for a far fewer number. I mean, it's like we're saying again, it's like the crisis has really exposed the super rich and the less the less well off, and the kind of the spectrum between. And I think probably this will further polarize those 2 positions. So the VIP experience in store is probably going to become the kind of exclusive domain of a different kind of group of people who have got a lot of money to spend and probably will spend it.
Yeah, exactly. Just turning to think about sort of other future behaviours and trends, I mean, the fashion world, just honing in here for a moment, I mean, that really seems to have taken a sort of, a very different tone to everybody else, in the sense that it's almost been redefining itself as a result of this crisis. Do you think there'll sort of be this sort of after fashion world? And, I guess, how do you think you can help support those changes to avoid going back to previous behaviours?
I I'm cautious to say anything right now, because I feel like we're 3 months down the line, and we're looking at a situation which is still very much in a state of kind of chaos, really. We've got stock sitting in shops that has been there since February and hasn't moved. We've got new stock coming in, and you've got a next season about to arrive in about 2 months' time. And obviously the system is going to have to be slowed in order to kind of manage this, and also because the kind of channels of production and distribution have been so log jammed at so many different levels. And we have got a vast amount of overproduction. We've got a vast amount of overmatter, but the shops also need to get rid of what the stock they've got. So whilst the brands are signaling a lot of the right noises in terms of wanting to slow the system down, the boutiques, I think, are in a particularly difficult situation, because they have got to shift stuff. They've paid for product that they've got to get rid of. So it really requires the sort of participation of so many different component parts. The brands need to lead, perhaps the creatives need to possibly work out how they sit on the schedule and how many collections they need to do. They need to work kind of in tandem with the shops, so that the shops can kind of work through their inventory and see where they are, and not get overwhelmed with product. And also you've got to have people who can make it, so that you've got the kind of factories and the manufacturing facilities that are going to make it a safe environment. So it's difficult to say whether or not we can be reborn out of this better people, and the system will be better. The system's currently in a lot of trouble. The market is due to contract by 30%. So yes, we definitely need to stop making so much stuff, and we definitely need to stop producing so many collections, I would say. But there are so many other points and parts of this that they also need to be ironed out. I think it's going to be a lot more fluid. I think different brands will decide slightly different paths. And if the big two brands, if Kering and LVMH, don't want to play, that does sort of set a different tone for everybody. It only takes one brand to say, I'm going to keep doing 8 collections a year, who've got the money. And it forces everyone into kind of a kind of competition again. So it does require a lot of participation.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely, it makes sense. This just pressurizes everybody else. I guess also they need to, this sort of concept of sales is also really dangerous to protect brand equity. We've that's been a big topic for a while.
Yeah, it's really complicated. I'm glad I'm not having to fix it. And then on top of that, you've got this virtual showroom / catwalk show situation, which we're going into for menswear and then for couture. That will be really interesting. What's the uptake on that? Does it work? Do people enjoy it? Do the designers and the creatives around it feel as though they get the experience that they wanted? Is their creative vision being served? There are so many things now to think about in terms of how you project your brand into a kind of a consumer market that is, at best, I would say, probably a little bit apathetic at the moment about what shoes they're going to wear. But we are coming out of lockdown as well, and by November, I'm personally being told I'm not allowed to go back into the office till the end of September. So by October, I'm hoping we're going to be a bit more out in the world. So shifts in mindset, you might just have a completely different outlook by then. Although I would say to any brand, invest in bicycling equipment, because I think we're all going to be cycling in London for the rest of our lives, aren't we?
Yeah, that's a really scary thought. Just picking up on it's sort of in the similar vein as your fashion observations. There's been a lot of talk about taking a step backwards in sustainability as a result of, sanitization and single-use plastics needed to sort of facilitate this. I mean, that's both in the retail world and then hospitality world. It's also a concern as well. Have you heard anything about that on the grapevine through any of your brands, editors? Any insights? Anyone else sharing those concerns?
I mean, I've more thought about it, to be honest, in terms of hospitality, because, so much work had been done in the last 2 years to kind of look at the food packaging, and almost overnight, it's sort of, taken a step back, and it's far more visible when you can just see everybody with plastic bottles and like single-use plastics. In the fashion industry, obviously, it's not yet as evident because I haven't seen it with like my own eyes in the same way. I mean, it's on the one hand, there are so many things that have happened that are kind of toward the better of sustainability. Like there's less flights, there's, we're all traveling a lot less, we're probably buying less, we're buying more mindfully, we're thinking more carefully about what we buy. Hopefully we're thinking about the means it's being manufactured. On that, and then on the other side, you've got all the things that are necessary to kind of make it sellable. So I have thought about it. I don't know what they'll do, but I think sustainability will continue to be part of the dialogue. I don't think it's going to be forgotten about, for sure. And if you're a brand with any kind of sense of like reading the mood, you would continue to make sustainability a huge part of your narrative.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's been so much part of a narrative, almost too much part of a narrative for, whilst not potentially having the goods to back it up. And now hopefully we will see more of the efforts go throughout the supply chain as well. So turning back to think about how to spend it and thinking ahead. In particular, I mean, we've spoken about how much more receptive we all are to virtual engagement now. Do you think there'll be a more sort of focused concentration of how to spend it online? Do you think there'll be more live interactive events for your readers? Is that something you're going to embrace?
It's interesting you say it, because actually the one thing that's kind of come out of the lockdown period is that our weekend sales have been up by about 9% year on year. So actually, even despite the kind of horrendous limitations on people's time and how they've been able to access the paper, and I'm not going to lie, distribution's been tricky, especially in Europe, and especially in places like Australia or places in South Africa where the newsagents are closed. People have made a real effort to go and get this print object, and that's something. And they've made a huge effort also to share pictures of themselves reading the print product in various places wherever they are. It's sort of almost been, I mean, I don't want to like overstretch it, but has had a sort of talismanic property. And I have been, I've been so grateful for that. And I've also thought there is some kind of magic in the print, and the fact that people have really sort of like used it as this, they've considered it their treat, and they've really kind of invested in it, like literally invested, like often going to like multiple newsagents on a Saturday to try and find one. So yes, obviously, I mean, the online has been a huge factor in how we get the kind of message across. The big thing for us is that we're hoping to shift onto the FT main site, which I might have touched on a bit in the past, because we're currently on a microsite, and I want to be integrated into the kind of like just the general FT kind of ecosystem, which means we'll obviously access kind of millions more readers, quite literally. So that's the big focus for me for the summer. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to launch that by the end of August. Well, I say hope, I mean, we will be launching that at the end of August. As for the digital reader events, I mean, there's a lot of Q&As and things that they do already at the FT. And I think for me, it's about kind of not standing so much apart as how to spend it, but trying to kind of bring our content as part of a kind of bigger package within what we're doing under the umbrella of the Financial Times. I've seen an awful lot of digital coverage during this crisis, a lot of events like this. I don't know whether I've got a huge amount to contribute in providing more. So I think if I were to do something, or were to do more live reader events, I'd really want to think about ways of doing something really, really original and different. And right now, I've been very preoccupied with getting the magazine out. But I think moving along, yes, digital is something that has been a huge thing. I mean, sorry to ramble on, but our Instagram account has doubled since I started, and that's definitely an area which I think has been kind of a huge area of engagement, and it's been hugely important for me as well to sort of test case subject matter, see what kind of content people want, have people react to content. Instagram is a very good barometer of what people's tastes are and where the mood is and what the tone is. Obviously the demographics are a lot younger than our kind of print reader possibly, but they are interested and they are engaged, and I found that invaluable. That has genuinely been a kind of revelation, especially during this crisis.
Has one of your objectives been to reduce the demographic age of the magazine in particular?
I mean, I think with all print organizations, their core reader tends to be older than they would ideally like, and so everybody wants more female readers, and the FT particularly wants more female readers, and they're very engaged in trying to engage a younger reader. How to Spend It clearly falls into a kind of demographic package that would appeal anyway to a younger female reader. So to an extent, I don't have to drive it down. I'm certainly not like chasing a millennial in any way, shape or form. But I just was conscious that I wanted How to Spend It to feel a lot more relevant to the reader, and too many readers that I met before I started just didn't feel that it spoke to them in the way that they wanted a magazine to speak to them. So I'm trying to accommodate all readers. So I don't want to alienate anybody, and I want all comers. So, but that's like, then you don't want to be a homogenous, bland, broad church of nothing either. You want to have a point of view. So it's a nice mix, I think.
You mentioned that this crisis has accelerated sort of probably reaching your vision of what How to Spend It was going to look like in terms of sort of more breadth and everything like that. Do you think it's going to be one of those pieces that just constantly evolves, or do you have a really specific vision of where you want to get it to?
No, I think the beauty of this crisis is that you have realized that you only survive when you're agile. I think if you go in with some sort of like fixed formula about what you want to do and how you see your vision working in 9 months' time, then you're going to come a cropper. And our sort of like our saving grace, I think, has been that, on a Monday I've been able to look at something and go, this just feels wrong. I just like, we can't run this, so pull that and let's do that and shift it around, and like, what's going on, and do we need to react to this, and have we got enough representation here, is this too homogenized? It's that's the only way. I think everything's a constant state of evolution, and I think if you kind of try and put it in aspect, that's when you immediately you start suffering, I think.
And so what's next? What's coming up? Are you able to share about any special editions or insights into your editorial schedule?
Sure, yeah. What am I? I'm working on an escape issue, which is coming out at the end of June. It's sort of a secondary sort of travel, because our first travel issue was sort of essays about places in isolation, or it was kind of largely tied to the coronavirus experience for people in different parts of the world. Although I try to kind of imbue it with some sense of like, some sense of travel or kind of information about a place. The escape issue is much more about like, where the hell am I going to find some water this summer? Because I think we're all totally preoccupied about, I think we're all kind of preoccupied about when we're going to get our swimming costumes on and whether we're going to get to sunbathe on a beach. So that's our kind of escape issue. Then we've got a beauty. We're going to do a new beauty piece, a big section, which will be at the beginning of July, because I think it's been a really interesting point for the industry to kind of look at where it's going and to address all of these things. Like, is it about clean beauty? Is it about organic beauty? Is it all about antibacterials? Is it all about traditional brands? So that's a big business focus piece, but also with a lot of kind of consumer interest and wellness and well-being, and things about mental health as well, which I think have been a kind of huge feature as well of this crisis. So that will be July. Then we only have one issue in August because it's summer, and then we kick off a new season, I hope, with the facility to be able to shoot a lot more fashion. I mean, that's the one thing. I mean, yes, I've been able to evolve and be agile, but I'm desperate to just be able to do a nice shoot. I mean, we've got things going on at the moment, but one of the things I wanted to bring to How to Spend It was beautiful photography and a real elevated fashion content, and that has been really, you know, it's been a real challenge when you can't do that, and you can't fly people around, and you can't move, and you can't go outside. So that's my big focus for the autumn, is like bring back the beautiful pictures and bring back some locations. You know, I just want to see some lovely views.
Well, I'm sure there'll be more questions about the specific content as we keep talking, but that brings me to the end of our planned questions, but we have had a little flurry on the Zoom chat and the Q&A as we've been talking. So we could go through these quickly. I know you don't have all day, but so Samantha from Belmont says, thank you so much. She says, I love How to Give It movement. I loved your How to Give It movement. But she says, do you think luxury brands are doing enough? And how do philanthropic causes not directly related to COVID response efforts find a space in a post-pandemic world?
This is super interesting, and it's something we're working on a big issue for later in the year, because we did a How to Give It special in January, but it was UK only, and it was focused, I guess, therefore on UK charities, but it was about philanthropy and how to kind of, you know, how to do things, how to give money away, which is actually weirdly difficult for rich people. And they find there are various obstacles to them doing it. So we were trying to help them. And obviously throughout this, we've had there's so many philanthropic causes that are suffering desperately through lack of funding, because funds have been diverted. I think what we discovered when we did our COVID coverage philanthropy is that a lot of the fashion houses, a lot of the big brands were in an incredibly lucky position where they could access money because they'd already developed foundations. So a lot of the like the Ralph Lauren Foundation or whatever, they could effectively dip into their kind of pot and kind of put it towards whichever causes they wanted to, according to the kind of, you know, the mood that they felt. And I think it's true also for the Ferragamo one. I think I think where a brand has got a foundation already, they have a sort of flexibility to give money where they want. I think my personal focus, or where I'm very interested in what will happen in the months to come, are for the big charities like the children's hospitals or domestic abuse or homelessness, very much kind of people related charities that have obviously kind of almost been virtually, you know, bereft of funds because people have been giving them elsewhere. We're running actually a big feature on Great Ormond Street, which is like tens and tens of millions short of money for what it needs to do for the rest of the year. And you know, it's a leading teaching hospital in the world, and they're desperately suffering. So what can brands do? Have I even remotely answered this question? And brands can do an awful lot. We're going to be doing a lot more of that kind of focus. We're going to be doing a lot more editorial focusing on that in the months to come, and also kind of trying to highlight the areas that are perhaps not getting like as much coverage as COVID might have had, and where we can kind of help give them a platform.
And I mean, you covering that is so imperative to the brands, because naturally it's such a 360 decision, some of these philanthropic, you know, initiatives, that if they know that they're going to get recognition and it's going to be recognized by the luxury industry and then known by the wider world, that certainly, from my background in communications, does make those decisions a lot easier. So having that platform is super important. Madeline from Liberty, she is currently formulating her response to Black Lives Matter and Black Tuesday. She's asked quite a generic question. She just says, do you have a point of view here?
Yes, obviously. I don't know quite, but what do I think about Black Lives Matter?
I think she's obviously formulating a brand response. So I guess it's
okay.
Brands be responding. Should brands be responding?
I think it's a very fast moving situation, and from an experience that I've had, completely unrelated, but somebody I know who actually works for an arts organisation in which they weren't immediately out of the box on Sunday with their kind of response to Black Lives Matter. There was pushback from various people within that same organisation. So I think not saying anything at this moment is difficult, but I think you don't want to virtue signal, you don't want to look like you're insincere, and you don't want to look as though you're doing, you're just kind of like joining the herd, but not necessarily being active in any way, shape or form. So my feeling is that, and it also, you know, to what extent do brands that aren't necessarily so international get involved in a story that might be seen as being kind of very American in its focus, although Black Lives Matter obviously has a kind of UK wing. It's complicated, but I think no response at the moment is probably quite dangerous, is my feeling. I mean, certainly even yesterday on How to Spend It on our Instagram account, we were getting pushback from readers who were saying, why aren't you, you know, why are you promoting any content that isn't related to this? Would you see it as appropriate? And so we did put up a post saying where you could find out more about Black Lives Matter and donate to that if you wanted. And we are not posting anything today in recognition of Blackout Tuesday, but it's very volatile, and if you say the wrong thing, it's horrific. So it's approached with caution, and I think probably just listen to what other people suggest as well. I think don't try and come up with a strategy all on your own. Get a few people in the room and kind of come up with it as a kind of, you know, combined effort, because it's hard taking the plunge on your own.
Thank you for that. Another question from Jane Alexander: how we balance a sustainable approach to business when our concerns may manifest in an increase in the increase of charter of private jets and luxury travel and items being wrapped more excessively to provide a certain level of sanitation and hygiene. I think actually we've covered this. Jane, do just pop any, if there was a part 2 to that question and we didn't cover it, but I think that's I think we've done that. We've also got questions about how social media has changed, which I think we've also covered. What do you see as the challenges ahead for big brands? Nikki from Fendi's asking.
I mean, I think it's the challenge of, I think it's, well, let's take an example that's quite interesting to see about the LV Pont Neuf bag that was launched last week as an influencer campaign. And it's so hard to navigate timing in this crisis. I think that's what I found with the magazine. I think it's presumably what brands must feel with their campaign launches. It's like what feels right on Monday can feel really eggy on Tuesday. And so things are very fast moving, and it's whether or not you can kind of, once you've gone out there, you have to sort of like, it's a little bit with your heart in your mouth, because things can just change so quickly in a very short space of time. So I think in terms of what brands do, they just need to, you've got to read the room. You've really got to like think hard about what you're trying to do with who you're trying to say. Are you being fully representative? And I think, you know, trying to sell a luxury product in this space is difficult at the moment. You know, how much space is there for luxury handbags? I think the brands have done a nice job actually about making sure they're kind of allied with other feelings and things that aren't about kind of possessions. I mean, anyone that's allied with family or sharing or spending time with other people, or I don't think it all needs to be about like helping the key workers, because I think we're well aware that we're very grateful to the key workers, and I'm not expecting a brand like Fendi necessarily to do anything beyond what it's already doing in terms of like turning its capacity to making a mask or whatever. But I think awareness, just being aware of like what you're going out into the world with, and that you're not speaking to one particular, whilst you might be trying to speak to one particular demographic, everyone else is seeing what you're saying, because social media is a massive platform and everyone can see it and they will critique it. So I think you have to make your messages as universal as you possibly can.
I think that's really wise words. I think that's it.
Okay, good.
A huge thank you for your insights. I mean, you deserve a very big round of applause, far louder than the little pathetic one I'm giving you. We really do appreciate your words of wisdom, and maybe let's check in like a couple of months and
okay, cool.
do this again and sort of see where we are. In terms of dates for other members' diaries over the next few months, we've got another virtual LCC fireside on the 9th of July. That's with Nick Blunden, President of the Business of Fashion. We are going to be pivoting the topic. We were going to talk about creativity. We'll probably still talk about creativity to an extent, but we'll pivot it to make it much more relevant to what is happening that week, that month, post-lockdown. 10th of September, we hopefully will do our in-person fireside, but we'll see. Watch this space. So that's with Mantaj Dial, senior broadcast over at BBC World, looking at the new era of broadcast. And please, please mark your diaries. 5th of November is our LCC Leaders Forum. So that's the, I mean, most of you have been before, but it's the definitive gathering of all the leaders in luxury comms and marketing. So larger scale than our usual gatherings. And we'll see what format that takes, but hopefully it'll be in a lovely hotel like last time, something like the Rosewood, but we shall see. And just to say one more thank you, very big thank you to Joe. And a final word that the LCC is here to support you, our members, during this time. So let us know what we can do to be there to help you. Thank you all very much. Bye.
I'm leaving. Bye.
I'm going to end it.